In 1924, Adolf Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, My Struggle, a book filled with hatred. Adolf Hitler, born April 20, 1889. He commits suicide on April 30, 1945. How did this Austrian who came out of nowhere succeed in conquering Germany? How did he sow the seeds of hatred and violence? Apocalypse. How was the Hitler phenomena possible? In Mein Kampf, Hitler writes, "The First World War was the most unforgettable and most sublime moment in my earthly existence." For 4 years, Corporal Hitler has been a courier, carrying messages for Bavaria's 16th Infantry Regiment. He runs from trench to trench, delivering the soldiers their orders. It's a dangerous assignment. He is decorated with the Iron Cross. He will wear his Iron Cross underneath his Nazi Party insignia. During the First World War, Hitler learns utter disdain for the value of human life, as do many other soldiers in this terrible conflict. Hitler gradually becomes a fanatical nationalist. Also, in the trenches, the confused idea is born that one day he will bear witness and stand up for his companions in misery. In other words, get into politics. Hitler will know how to effectively exploit his camaraderie with fellow war veterans, as he does 15 years later in this speech to workers at the Siemens factory.
Volksgenossen und Genossinnen, meine deutschen Arbeiter, ich bin aus euch selbst heraus, bin einst selbst unter euch gestanden, bin in 4,5 Jahren Krieg wieder mitten unter euch gewesen und habe mich dann durch Fleiß, durch Lernen und ich kann sagen durch Hungern langsam emporgearbeitet. In meinem innersten Wesen bin ich immer das geblieben, was ich vorher war.
A succession of events would accelerate his political engagement. On the night of October 13, 1918, a gas shell attack makes him temporarily blind. He is evacuated to a field hospital and then to Germany. Meanwhile, at the front, the Germans are pushed back and many are taken prisoner. Hatred of the French is omnipresent, fueled by the victors' injurious acts. Prisoners, the soldiers of the Kaiser, German Emperor Wilhelm II, try to maintain their dignity as they're marched through the same French and Belgian villages they've laid waste to over the last 4 years. The rest of the German army begins its retreat. These soldiers will keep the bitterness of a defeat that is portrayed by extreme right-wing propagandists as being caused by Germany's unpatriotic elements, those who negotiated with the enemy. At this moment, an event occurs in Hitler's life that he will always consider a turning point. He slowly recovers and eventually regains his sight in the Paswalk military hospital north of Berlin, where the army treats cases of shell shock. Hitler recounts that when he learned of the emperor's abdication, the end of the German monarchy in favor of a republic, and the armistice of November 11, 1918 that marked Germany's defeat, he heard an inner voice. He states, "This voice called me to free the German people and to restore Germany's greatness." To this hallucination, Hitler will add his obsession. For him, the German eagle was stabbed by the Jews. In Mein Kampf, he writes, "If we had just once during the war used poison gas on 12 or 15,000 of those Hebrew corruptors of the people, the sacrifice of millions of men would not have been in vain." Already at the end of 1916, the heads of the Imperial Army, Field Marshal Hindenburg and his adjutant, General Ludendorff, in an ill-considered ultra-nationalist gesture, ordered an account of the Jewish soldiers suspected of unpatriotic behavior. Anti-Semitism goes back centuries and knows no borders. Dogged by this destiny throughout history, the Jews, whether poor and living in ghettos or assimilated in bourgeois, periodically become scapegoats in times of crisis. In Russia, at the beginning of the 20th century, they have been victims of pogroms, massacres. Many who fled the persecution settled in Germany. The big question is, did Hitler himself have Jewish blood? One of the Nazi regime's most closely guarded secret is that he's unable to prove the opposite. He doesn't know who one of his grandfathers was. The identity of his father's father is unknown. Hitler's grandmother eventually married a miller, Johann Hitler, who recognized the son, giving him his name. According to Nazi law, Hitler doesn't meet the so-called protection of the blood criteria imposed on the Germans, who, to avoid persecution, must prove that none of their 4 grandparents were Jewish. Hitler cannot prove that he isn't Jewish in Nazi terms. April 20, 1889, Adolf Hitler is born to a Catholic family in what is then the Austro-Hungarian Empire in Braunau am Inn, a small town on the border with the German Empire. His father is a customs officer. A widower, he remarried his much younger cousin, making it an interbred union. During Hitler's early childhood, the family moves often due to his father's changing assignments along the border. At 8, he is an altar boy in this monastery. He sings and admires the priest's self-sacrifice and sense of mission. He notices a strange cross upon the monastery's pediment. It prefigures the swastika, which will become the Nazi emblem. Hitler will always remember the monastery's cross, as if it were a portent of his destiny. In India, for centuries, the swastika has been a beneficial symbol of the perpetual movement of humanity. In the Nazis' deviant interpretation, it becomes the symbol of the Aryan race, a mythical pure race of tall, blue-eyed blondes, to which Hitler will add a helmet, and the mystique of a superior race.
Unseren Augen, da muss der deutsche Junge der Zukunft lang und rank sein. Flink wie Mithunde, Zähne leer und hart wie sind entschlossen, ein neues Geschlecht voranzuziehen.
Growing up, Hitler doesn't correspond to this ideal. He is pampered by his mother. He will return to this Austrian landscape at important moments in his career, like this one, a few weeks before his invasion of Poland and his provocation of the Second World War. Images of his childhood home, filmed and edited by his mistress Eva Braun. He bears no resentment towards his father, a strict disciplinarian who drank. But his mother, who died from cancer at age 47, was the only person Hitler ever really loved. During all of the Führer's birthdays, she reigns over the presents, and in his bunker during his final moments, Hitler carries her portrait with him. Hitler was in conflict with his father, who wanted him to become a civil servant. But Hitler will not go far in school, arrogantly considering himself above the education system. At 19, after his mother's death, he leaves for Vienna. He's not predestined to go into politics, since he dreams of attending the Beaux-Arts Academy. Thanks to his inheritance, he's able to live the bohemian artist's life. Having left his home province, he discovers the many communities living in the Austro-Hungarian capital. Czechs, Poles, Italians, Croatians, and Jews. He will later state, "It appeared to me like the incarnation of racial profanation." He makes a try at the Beaux-Arts entrance exam that he barely prepares for. Despite all his ambition, he isn't admitted. The period that follows is a difficult one. It's just before the Great War. He lives in a boarding house for men and survives by copying postcards for tourists. With the little money he earns, he attends the opera to hear Wagner, which, as a friend recounts, sends Hitler into a trance. Hitler, whose everyday life is mediocre at best, dreams of these heroes of Germanic legend. One of his favorite operas is Rienzi, in which a young warrior takes on the mission of saving his people. Mobilization. Hitler is 25 this August 2nd, 1914, and the declaration of war will transform his failed artist's life. Earlier, to escape military service, he had fled Austria. Now he is in Germany, in Munich, swept up in the folly of extreme nationalist sentiment that is hurtling all of Europe towards the Great Massacre. He fought in the war, and the war transformed him. After 4 years with his regiment, he returns to Munich, to a Germany in the throes of revolution. Hitler is 30 years old. A decisive period opens up before him. Above all, he wants to remain in the army, which guarantees order and stability for the new regime of the Social Democrat president, Friedrich Ebert. The young republic must deal with the Marxist revolutionary movement, who are trying to seize power like the Bolsheviks did in Russia 2 years before. The army crushes them, aided by volunteer nationalists, the Free Corps, a spawning ground for the future Nazi party. Hitler serves in the army with great zeal. His primary goal is to keep a roof over his head and keep his mess kit, for which he'll stoop to anything. He becomes a provocateur, an informer, denouncing comrades he suspects of being Reds. His superior officers, whose duties include controlling the population by combating communist ideas, take note of his anti-revolutionary fervor. They give Hitler a mission: the political re-education of returning German soldiers and prisoners of war. Hitler's commanding officer notes, "He's a natural-born orator. His fanaticism and populism captivates listeners, forcing one to think as he does." Hitler says, "At that moment, I understood that I knew how to speak." From his beginnings, Hitler knew how to escalate intensity and to feed his listeners exactly what they wanted to hear. In 1919, he denounces the national shame of the Treaty of Versailles. After months of discussions among themselves, the victors, above all France, England, and the United States, impose harsh peace terms on Germany, as if it alone were responsible for the massive carnage. The Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919, condemns Germany to pay enormous reparations, which will create a great burden on the economy and will become a central issue in Germany's popular grievances. Germany also sees 13% of its territories and 1/10 of its population amputated. Alsace-Lorraine once again becomes French, and the Rhine's entire left bank is demilitarized. A German film of the period denounces the carving up of the national territory. The worst is the separation of East Prussia from Germany to reconstitute Poland, partitioned in the 18th century, giving it access to the sea. The Polish corridor will be the issue that ultimately leads to the Second World War. For many Germans, the Allies' condition that paramilitary anti-revolutionary forces be disarmed adds insult to injury. They witness the destruction of their submarines, their battleships, and their air force. Germany's army is reduced to 100,000 men. Hitler, against his wishes, is demobilized into this Bavarian region in upheaval, where the right-wing extremist groups proliferate. Here, he is filmed for the first time during a demonstration of the DAP, the German Workers' Party. As early as 1919, the army has ordered him to infiltrate and spy on this group. Lacking better prospects, he remains a member and develops into a full-time political agitator. Politically, Bavaria is on the far right, whereas power in Berlin is with the center-leftist Weimar Republic, named after the city where the new constitution has just been voted into law. Hitler, transformed into a dyed-in-the-wool Bavarian, howls with the wolves against the November criminals, the signatories of the Armistice and Versailles Diktat. These sentiments are shared by the army, especially by the war veterans who gather in Munich's large beer halls. One of these is the Burger Braukeller, where on August 13, 1920, Hitler makes his political debut with a lecture entitled, "Why Are We Anti-Semitic?" For Hitler, the answer is, beyond his visceral hatred for the Jews since the German defeat, that anti-Semitism is the best strategy for attracting nationalist militants. Hitler galvanizes the radicals of his small right-wing extremist group. They make him their leader and buy him a car, evidence of his importance. Hitler changes the party's name, associating the terms national and socialism. His goal is to create a wider appeal and to show his anti-capitalist stance. The DAP will now be the NSDAP, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the abbreviated form of which is Nazi. In his small headquarters in a Munich beer hall, he draws his party's emblem. He will write in Mein Kampf. After innumerable attempts, I chose a red flag to show our movement's social dimension, with a white circle representing our nationalism, and the swastika, symbol of the Aryan, the eternal anti-Semite. To protect their meetings, he creates the SA Stormtroopers, his assault unit, a small militia whose uniforms he obtains from a stock of the former Austro-Hungarian Customs Office. His radicalism increases the party's membership from 2,000 to 20,000. He succeeds thanks to the help of a racist sect, the Tool Society, named for a legendary Nordic kingdom. Its members finance a newspaper with funds of questionable origin. This publication becomes the official Nazi Party newspaper under a new title, Völkischer Beobachter, the Racist People's Observer. Its editor, Alfred Rosenberg, is a member of the Tool Society and acts as the theoretician of anti-Semitism. He'll be an important inspirer of the Shoah. Another former member of the Tool Society during his student days is Rudolf Hess. He'll become Hitler's secretary and one of his most servile and fanatical accomplices. Another addition to the early militants' ranks is a World War I hero, Hermann Göring, one of Germany's most celebrated fighter pilots. Like many other veterans, he has difficulty readapting to civilian life. In Hitler, he finds someone who articulates his own anti-revolutionary ideas. He'll become the number 2 of the Nazi regime and an instigator of the concentration camps. In 1922, in a political march, Hitler places Göring next to General Ludendorff, still wearing his spiked helmet, to show veterans that their great wartime chief supports the Nazis. Ludendorff, one of the men responsible for prolonging the war, is convinced that the politicians denied him his victory. This theory is shared by many German generals. Ludendorff's adhesion to nationalist ideas opens up new perspectives for Hitler. Everything seems possible. In Italy, the extreme right, Benito Mussolini's fascist party, has just seized power. Will the German Mussolini be Hitler? 1923 will be the decisive year. January 11, 1923. Stunned Germans watch helplessly as French and Belgian soldiers take control of the Ruhr, Germany's mining and steel production region. This results from Germany's refusal to pay its war reparations, the indemnities imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. The French and Belgians are taking payment directly in the form of coal. Consequently, the German government orders passive resistance. A miners' and rail workers' strike. The French will simply replace the strikers. No coal is left for the Germans. The situation becomes dangerously tense. On March 10, 1923, a French officer, Lieutenant Pierre Coulpin, of the 17th Infantry Battalion, is assassinated. His coffin travels home through towns, and French officers slap any Germans who don't remove their hats. Indelible images, captured forever, will be profitably exploited by the Nazis. Hitler denounces the weakness of the government that allows the French to treat Germany like one of its colonies. Germans are cold. Germans are hungry. They try to steal coal back from the French. The Weimar Republic must import its coal and pay the striking miners. These enormous expenses prompt the mint to begin printing huge quantities of new money. The mark depreciates dramatically. One day, Germans are paying 1 billion marks for a kilo of potatoes, and the next day, 460 billion for a loaf of bread. In this ferment of off-the-charts inflation and unemployment, the Bavarian extreme right mobilizes, with General Ludendorff as its leader. Thanks to Ludendorff, Hitler manages to unite all the veterans groups embittered by the defeat. He wants to attempt a putsch, a coup d'etat, to march on Munich and then Berlin. Hitler says, "Our people are subjected to such extreme economic conditions that if we don't act now, they'll change over to join the communists." Thanks to their accomplices in the army, the Nazis succeed in procuring guns. However, the army and police decide to remain loyal to the legal government. For Hitler in Munich, all seems lost. But he holds on to the wild fantasy that he and Ludendorff can still bring the population along with them. So he orders his troops to advance on the threatening police barricades. The two camps are face to face, with Hitler in his white coat in the middle. In fact, this is a Nazi photo montage intended to fabricate the myth of Hitler's courage. In reality, he was behind a bodyguard who was killed in the shooting, for the police opened fire, putting an end to Hitler's 1923 putsch. Hitler was arrested, and the National Socialist Party banned. The great Austrian author Stefan Zweig wrote, "Thus, in that year of 1923, the swastikas and stormtroopers vanished, and Hitler's name sunk into oblivion again." Three months after Hitler's arrest, the trial of the putschists opens in Munich. Hitler is accused of high treason, punishable by the death penalty. Ludendorff, who has not even been incarcerated, arrives at the trial in a luxury car with his attorneys. He is freed without further ado, out of respect for his glorious past, and because he continues to have influential supporters. He will be acquitted. Hitler, who has threatened to kill himself, now realizes that the court is not as hostile as he thought. He draws on all his oratory talents, launching his usual fiery invective towards the government and the Jews. The trial becomes an unexpected pulpit, the judges becoming more and more sympathetic, and the public thronging to get in. As a result, the verdict is much less severe than Hitler feared. He's condemned to 5 years in a relatively comfortable cell, with a view of the countryside. The conditions of his imprisonment resemble a stay in a hotel, in that he is free to receive Nazi sympathizers at any time of the day. One supporter even brought a laurel crown for the man he calls the incarnation of the nation's ardent desire. Hitler is free to receive any news publications he wants, and he even begins reading Marx. Rudolf Hess, condemned to 15 months for his role in the putsch, has the neighboring cell, and joins the small group who essentially discuss infighting between the right-wing parties, who are tearing each other apart. Hitler's return is becoming a necessity. His accomplices on the outside devise a strategy to have his release brought forward. Hitler realizes he'll soon be freed, and he feels the need to expound his singular view of life and his political principles. Nazi journalists rewrite his hurriedly written manuscript. Hitler wants to name the book 4.5 years of struggle against lies, foolishness, and cowardice. But this title is considered too long and is changed to Mein Kampf, My Struggle. It contains Hitler's entire worldview, and the Nazis will make it their new Bible. Transcribed like the Holy Scriptures and bound like the great medieval manuscripts. Hitler rants about the struggle of the master race, the tall, blonde, Aryan Germanic race, the necessary conquest of its living space, the eradication of communism, and the crushing of France and the Jews, who, in Hitler's eyes, do not even belong to the human species. At the time, many readers judged the book to be errant madness, a fatal error. On the contrary, it should have been read carefully and taken seriously, for it's at the root of the deaths of 50 million human beings. Hitler is released from prison on December 20th, 1924, for good behavior. Now, he dreams he's a successor to the great founders of the German nation, such as Bismarck. He claims, "My time in prison brought me confidence, optimism, and a belief that nothing could ever shake me again." And yet, his journey through the political desert is only beginning. Mein Kampf is a failure, selling barely 20,000 copies. Hitler spends much of his time in a Bavarian mountain village, Berchtesgaden, where he rents a small chalet. He writes the second volume of Mein Kampf. It deals mainly with his project of expanding Germany's living space into Russia. Sales of the book are average, until his taking of power in 1933. When Hitler does take power, Mein Kampf will almost be required reading, the German state offering it to couples as a wedding gift. If it isn't on your bookshelf, you could be denounced by your hired help. By hook or by crook, Mein Kampf will be sold, and it's translated into countless languages. The royalty payments are astronomical, making Hitler a very rich man. On February 27, 1925, Hitler makes his political comeback in the famous Munich beer hall where he launched the putsch, reaffirming his leadership of the Nazi Party. The next day, an event occurs that will advance his cause. The very incarnation of the new German democracy, the first president of the Weimar Republic, Social Democrat Friedrich Ebert, dies from a badly treated case of appendicitis. Germans feel the loss strongly. Germans must elect a new president, and the swastika makes its comeback during the political campaign. The ban on the Nazi Party has recently been lifted, as it's no longer considered dangerous. In fact, Ludendorff, the candidate of the United Extreme Right parties, obtains barely 1% of the vote. Ludendorff's failure is what Hitler secretly desires, as it disposes of his main rival, for whom he half-heartedly campaigned. Revealing his political instinct, he says, "We gave him the finishing blow." The man the Germans elect is the other great war commander, Marshal von Hindenburg. In 1870, as a young officer, he was present at the proclamation of the Second German Empire in Versailles' Hall of Mirrors. He reassures the army and unites the conservatives, which worries the left and the rest of Europe. Hitler will lie in wait. The Nazi Party succeeds in spreading its cancer throughout Germany, its membership reaching 170,000. Hitler transforms his stormtroopers into a veritable private army. They are younger and younger, but let there be no mistake. This paramilitary order is composed of brutal fanatics, killers. Their new uniform earns them the nickname, the Brown Shirts. It imitates Mussolini's black shirts, who some years before marched so successfully on Rome. Another symbol borrowed from Mussolini is the Roman salute, the outstretched arm accompanied by a guttural cry. In Mussolini's case, it's Viva il Duce. With Hitler, it becomes Heil Hitler, long live Hitler. The SA uniform is created by a select team of German designers. Among the manufacturers is Stuttgart designer Hugo Boss, who promotes it in his ad campaigns. Hugo Boss, a Nazi Party member, will also produce the terrifying black uniforms of the SS, the Schutzstaffel, Hitler's new protection unit, as well as the Hitler Youth uniforms. This is all very costly. The money mainly comes from rank-and-file Nazi Party members and from rich sympathizers, such as steel magnate Fritz Thyssen, whose steel plants are ready to forge new guns. They also include Henry Ford, the world's largest car manufacturer. The anti-Semitic Henry Ford will strongly support the Nazis. Ford will be the first foreigner the Nazis decorate with the Order of the German Eagle. In 1907, Hitler chooses Nuremberg, a Nazi bastion and a medieval city of historical significance with a Wagnerian allure which brings out its connection to the Germanic warlords of the Dark Ages. Hitler calls Nuremberg his ideological capital. He also wants to highlight the party's submission to the Führer, its leader. This personality cult will be enhanced through the work of his personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann. Always at the center of events, a Nazi from the start, a virtuoso of the Leica, he is always close to his master. Hoffmann takes a series of surprising photographs intended to show the great leader's personal side. To win over female voters, as far as the Nazis can grasp their preferences. In Hoffmann's small Munich photography shop, Hitler, as always, inspired by Wagner and fascinated by opera singers' theatrical movements, studies a whole range of gestures conveying domination, which he will use in the first big Nazi rallies. Hitler states, "The masses are feminine and stupid. Only emotion and hatred can keep them under control." This is exactly what the SA is sowing throughout Germany, beginning with the Jewish neighborhoods in large cities. In what is still a peaceful society, Stefan Zweig is a witness to the birth of violence. He writes, "It was the fascist method, but in the German style, carried out with military precision. At the blow of a whistle, the SA would leap from the trucks with lightning speed, beat people up with their billy clubs, and at the sound of another whistle blow, they would jump back into their trucks and race away as fast as they had come." But the intimidation and terror produced sparse results. In Germany's 1928 legislative elections, the Nazis obtained only 2.6% of the vote, less than 1 million ballots. The Communists received 3 times as many, the Central Party 4 million, and the Right 5 million. The Social Democrats come out on top with 10 million votes. Yet in the Reichstag, Berlin's parliament, this 2.6% of ballots, mainly from rural areas, translates into 12 new Nazi deputies. They create quite an impact, as almost all are wearing SA uniforms. Among them, making his comeback, is Hermann Göring. Wounded in the lower stomach during the putsch, he's gained a lot of weight and become addicted to morphine. It is finally Joseph Goebbels' grand entrance into politics. He closely corresponds to a maxim formulated by Nietzsche in the previous century. Fanaticism is the only form of willpower to which the weak and irresolute can rise. Goebbels is hardly the tall, blonde Aryan type. He's short, limps, and has suffered from an inferiority complex since childhood due to his club foot. However, his diabolical cunning compensates for this handicap. He's a rebel against society who flirted with Marxism until the decisive meeting of his life with Adolf Hitler. Goebbels then saw the light. By refusing to publish his manuscripts, the Jews have prevented him from becoming a great writer, and the communists are responsible for the chaos in society. He states, "We enter the Reichstag like wolves into the sheep pen." But it's impossible at this moment for either the public or the deputies to grasp the significance of his statement. The general public's view of the Nazis is expressed in the newspaper, the Frankfurter Zeitung. Hitler has no coherent ideas or thoughts. Hitler is a dangerous madman. He's arrived at this point by following the wartime ideology to the letter, interpreting it in a primitive way, as if we lived in the times of the barbarian invasions at the fall of the Roman Empire. Germany is not worried. It would surely take a major catastrophe for Hitler to have any future in politics. Historian Ian Kershaw writes, "Without the Great Depression, without the crash of 1929, without the disintegration of the bourgeoisie, the liberals, and the conservatives, Hitler would have remained a nutcase on the political sidelines." But Hitler will never abandon his mission.
Wir haben ein Ziel uns gewählt.